The gunshot echoed across the plains, a stark interruption to the otherwise peaceful Montana evening of 1873. Zara Thornton stumbled through the tall grass, her once fine blue dress torn and stained with dirt, her breath coming in desperate gasps. Behind her, the angry shouts of her pursuers grew louder. The wound in her side burned with each step, but she couldn't stop, not when freedom was so tantalizingly close after 3 years of captivity. "There she is," a gruff voice called out, and Zara's heart sank as she heard horses approaching. She had escaped Mason Blackwell's ranch on foot, stealing away in the night while her captor and his men drank themselves into a stupor celebrating a successful cattle sale. For 3 years, she had been kept in that cellar beneath the main house, brought out only when Mason wanted to parade her as his fiancée at social gatherings, always under threat and always under watch. The bullet had grazed her when she'd been spotted crossing the creek, but adrenaline had kept her going until now. As her legs finally gave way, Zara collapsed into the tall grass, gasping for breath, tears streaming down her dirt-streaked face. The approaching hoofbeats seemed to echo her racing heartbeat. This was it. They would drag her back to that dark, damp cellar. The momentary taste of freedom would make the return to captivity all the more bitter. The horses were nearly upon her now. Zara closed her eyes, waiting for rough hands to seize her. Instead, a different sound reached her ears, more gunshots, but not directed at her. A volley of rifle fire split the night, followed by shouts of confusion and pain. "Turn back!" she heard one of Blackwell's men yell. "It's an ambush!" The hoofbeats retreated, replaced by the sound of a single rider approaching cautiously. Zara held her breath, pressing herself deeper into the grass. "Hello?" a deep voice called out, not Mason's voice, not any voice she recognized. "I know you're out there. I'm not with them." Silence. "I saw you running. You're hurt. I can help." Zara remained perfectly still, her heart pounding so loudly she was certain he could hear it. Footsteps approached, and then a tall figure loomed over her. The moon emerged from behind a cloud, illuminating the face of a stranger, a man with sharp features, eyes the color of a stormy sky, and a week's worth of stubble on his jaw. He wore a dusty brown duster over practical riding clothes, a revolver holstered at his hip, and a wide-brimmed hat that cast shadows across his face. "Miss," he said softly, crouching down beside her, "I'm not going to hurt you." Zara tried to scramble away, but the pain in her side flared, and she gasped. "You're bleeding," he observed, his voice calm and steady. "Those men, they're from the Blackwell ranch. They've been chasing you for miles." "How do you know?" Zara managed to whisper, her voice rough from disuse and fear. "I've been tracking them," he replied simply. "Name's Trace Quincy. Most folks just call me Quinn." "They'll be back," Zara said, struggling to sit up. "With more men." "Probably," Quinn agreed, offering her a canteen of water. "But they won't find us. Can you ride?" Zara nodded hesitantly, taking a small sip of water. "Good," he said, standing up and whistling softly. A magnificent Palomino stallion approached, responding to his master's call. "Then we need to move, now." With gentle but firm hands, Quinn helped Zara to her feet and onto his horse, then swung up behind her. As they rode into the night, Zara's fear battled with an unfamiliar feeling hope. "Where are we going?" she asked, her voice barely audible over the rhythmic pounding of hooves. "Somewhere safe," Quinn answered, his breath warm against her ear. "Somewhere they won't look." They rode for what seemed like hours, the Montana landscape stretching endlessly around them. Eventually, they approached a small cabin tucked away in a grove of pines, nearly invisible in the darkness. "My winter line cabin," Quinn explained as he helped her down from the horse. "No one knows about this place except me and now you." Inside, the cabin was spare but clean. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, and simple wooden furniture filled the single room. Quinn lit a lantern, illuminating the space with a warm glow, then helped Zara to a chair. "Let me look at that wound," he said, reaching for her blood-stained side. Zara flinched away instinctively. Quinn's hands stilled. "I understand your caution, miss, but that needs tending or it'll fester." After a moment's hesitation, Zara nodded, allowing him to examine the graze on her side. "It's not deep," he pronounced, retrieving a wooden box from a shelf, "but it needs cleaning." He soaked a clean cloth in whiskey and looked at her apologetically. "This will hurt." Zara bit down on her lip as he cleansed the wound, but she didn't cry out. After 3 years of Mason Blackwell's discipline, she had learned to endure pain in silence. "You're mighty brave," Quinn observed, wrapping a clean bandage around her middle. His hands were calloused but gentle, and Zara found herself oddly comforted by his touch, the first kind physical contact she'd experienced in years. "How long were you his prisoner?" Quinn asked as he tied off the bandage. Zara's head snapped up, her green eyes wide with surprise. "How did you know?" "The calluses on your hands don't match that fine dress," he said. "And I've heard rumors about Blackwell keeping a woman against her will. Folks whisper, but no one dares cross him." 3 years, Zara whispered, tears welling in her eyes. "My parents died in a fire when I was 19. Mason offered me a position as a housekeeper. When we arrived at his ranch, She trailed off, unable to continue. Quinn nodded, understanding in his eyes. "You don't need to explain further. You're safe now." "He'll never stop looking for me," Zara said, fear creeping back into her voice. "He considers me his property." "Then we'll just have to make sure he never finds you," Quinn said firmly, rising to stoke the small fire in the hearth. "You should rest. Take the bed. I'll keep watch." Zara hesitated, exhaustion warring with caution. "I give you my word, miss. No harm will come to you while you're under my protection," Quinn said solemnly. Something in his steady gaze convinced her, and Zara nodded, making her way to the small bed in the corner. As she settled beneath the rough woolen blankets, she watched Quinn take a seat by the window, rifle across his knees, his profile sharp against the firelight. "Thank you," she murmured, her eyelids growing heavy. "I don't even know your full name." "Trace Quincy," he replied, turning to look at her with those storm-gray eyes. "And yours?" "Zara," she said softly. "Zara Thornton." "Sleep well, Miss Thornton," he said. "The sun will shine on you every day now. You have my word on that." As Zara drifted off to sleep, those words echoed in her mind. For the first time in 3 long years, she allowed herself to believe that tomorrow might actually be better than today. Morning came with golden light filtering through the cabin's small windows. Zara awoke with a start, momentarily disoriented by the unfamiliar surroundings. The events of the previous night came rushing back, and she sat up quickly, wincing at the pain in her side. Quinn was nowhere to be seen, but a pot of coffee simmered on the small cast-iron stove, and fresh clothes had been laid out at the foot of the bed, simple men's garments that would be too large for her frame, but infinitely more practical than her tattered dress. The cabin door opened, and Quinn entered, carrying an armful of firewood. He stopped short when he saw Zara awake, a hint of a smile softening his weathered features. "Morning," he said, setting down the wood beside the stove. "How's the wound?" "Better," Zara replied, surprised to find it was true. "Thank you for the clothes," Quinn nodded. "They'll be big, but they'll do until we can get you something proper. I've been thinking on what to do next. Blackwell's men will be searching every town within 50 miles. "What do you suggest?" Zara asked, accepting the cup of coffee he offered. "We need to get you somewhere he won't think to look," Quinn said, pouring himself a cup and leaning against the table. "I've got a sister in Abilene, Kansas. It's a good 500 miles from here, far enough that Blackwell's reach won't extend there." "Abilene," Zara repeated, testing the word. "Is it safe there?" "Safer than here," Quinn replied. "It's a cattle town, busy this time of year with the drives coming up from Texas. Easy place to disappear into." Zara nodded slowly, considering his words. "Why are you helping me? You don't know me. You're risking your life." Quinn's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Let's just say I've got no love for men who keep others captive." He turned away, busying himself with preparations for breakfast. "We'll leave at dusk. Safer to travel at night until we're well away from Blackwell's territory." Zara sensed there was more to his story, but she didn't press. Instead, she rose carefully from the bed and took the clothing behind a rough screen in the corner to change. The simple cotton shirt and trousers engulfed her slim frame, but with the aid of a belt and some rolled cuffs, she managed to make them serviceable. When she emerged, Quinn gave her an appraising look. "You'll pass for a young man from a distance," he said with approval. "Safer that way." They spent the day preparing for the journey. Quinn taught Zara how to load and fire a small revolver, his hands guiding hers with patient instruction. "I pray you won't need to use this," he said, "but I want you to be able to protect yourself if the need arises." As dusk approached, Quinn saddled 2 horses, his palomino and a sturdy chestnut mare he explained belonged to a friend who wouldn't miss her for a few weeks. "Can you ride astride?" he asked as he adjusted the mare's stirrups. Zara nodded. "Before my parents died, we had a small farm. I rode every day." Quinn seemed satisfied with this answer. "Good. We'll ride hard for the first few nights, then ease up once we're clear of Montana territory." As they set out under the cover of darkness, Zara cast one last glance at the cabin that had been her first taste of freedom in 3 years. Ahead lay uncertainty, danger, and a long journey. But for the first time since her parents' death, she felt something akin to hope stirring in her chest. They rode in silence for several hours, keeping to less traveled paths and avoiding the main trails. Quinn seemed to know the land intimately, navigating by the stars and leading them through passes and valleys that Zara would never have found on her own. Around midnight, they stopped by a small creek to rest the horses. As Zara slid from her saddle, the exertion of the ride catching up to her, she stumbled slightly. Quinn was at her side in an instant, his strong hands steadying her. "Sorry," she murmured, embarrassed by her weakness. "It's been a long time since I rode." "You're doing fine," Quinn assured her, his voice low. "Better than fine. Most folks couldn't keep up this pace after what you've been through." He helped her sit on a fallen log, then checked her bandage in the moonlight. His fingers were careful, clinical, but Zara couldn't help the flush that crept up her neck at his proximity. "The bleeding stopped," he said, apparently oblivious to her reaction. "That's good." As they rested, Quinn shared some jerky and hardtack from his saddlebags. They ate in companionable silence, the sounds of the wilderness around them a stark contrast to the oppressive quiet of Zara's cellar prison. "May I ask you something?" Zara said finally, watching Quinn as he refilled their canteens from the creek. He glanced up, a questioning look on his face. "You said you were tracking Blackwell's men. Why?" Quinn was silent for a long moment, his face unreadable in the shadows. When he finally spoke, his voice was tight with controlled emotion. "Mason Blackwell is not a good man. He's built his fortune on the backs of others' suffering." He paused, seeming to weigh his words. 2 years ago, my younger brother worked for him. Thomas was just 20, eager to prove himself. Blackwell accused him of stealing cattle, had him hung without a trial. Zara gasped softly. "I'm so sorry." "Thomas was no thief," Quinn continued, his jaw set hard. "He was just in the wrong place at the wrong time, and Blackwell needed someone to blame for his own missing stock. I've been watching Blackwell ever since, waiting for a chance to bring him to justice." "And then you found me instead," Zara said quietly. Quinn nodded, his eyes meeting hers. "Finding you might be the first step toward bringing him down. Your testimony could put him away for good." "If we make it to Abilene," Zara said, unable to keep the doubt from her voice. "We will," Quinn assured her, his confidence unwavering. "Now let's get back on the trail. We've got a lot of ground to cover before dawn." They continued their journey through the night, stopping only when necessary to rest the horses. As the first light of dawn appeared on the horizon, Quinn led them to a secluded spot in a dense copse of trees. "We'll rest here during the day," he explained, helping Zara down from her horse. "Less chance of being spotted." He quickly set up a small camp, creating a lean-to of branches and canvas that would shield them from view. Once the horses were tended to, Quinn spread out a bedroll for Zara. "Get some sleep," he advised. "I'll take first watch." "You need rest too," Zara protested, noting the dark circles under his eyes. "I'll wake you in a few hours and catch some shut-eye then," he promised. though Zara suspected he had no intention of doing so. Despite her concerns, exhaustion soon claimed her, and Zara fell into a deep sleep. She dreamed of her parents' farm of sunshine and open fields and a freedom she had almost forgotten. When she woke, the sun was high in the sky, filtering through the branches overhead in dappled patterns. Quinn sat with his back against a tree, cleaning his rifle with practiced movements. He looked up when he heard her stir. "Feel better?" he asked. Zara nodded, sitting up carefully. "You didn't wake me," Quinn shrugged. "You needed the rest more than I did." "That's not true," Zara said firmly. "You won't be much use to either of us if you collapse from exhaustion." A hint of amusement flickered in Quinn's eyes. "Yes, madam," he said, setting aside his rifle. "I suppose you're right." He stretched out on the ground, his hat tipped over his face. "Wake me if you hear anything unusual." Within minutes, his breathing had deepened, and Zara knew he was asleep. She studied him in repose, noting how the hard lines of his face softened in sleep, making him appear younger, less burdened. The stubble on his jaw had grown thicker, and a lock of dark hair had escaped from beneath his hat. Zara felt an unexpected warmth spread through her chest. This man, this stranger, had risked everything to help her, expecting nothing in return. In the 3 years of her captivity, she had forgotten that such goodness existed in the world. She took up the rifle Quinn had been cleaning, settling into position against the tree. Though she had little experience with firearms, she was determined to keep watch while he slept. She owed him that much at least. The day passed quietly, with Zara waking Quinn as the sun began its descent. They ate a simple meal of jerky and dried fruit, speaking little but comfortable in each other's company. As they prepared to set out for another night of travel, Quinn handed Zara a worn leather hat similar to his own. "For disguise," he explained. "Tuck your hair up inside it." Zara did as instructed, and Quinn nodded in approval. "From a distance, you'll pass for a young cowhand." They traveled for 5 more nights in this manner, gradually making their way southeast toward Kansas territory. With each passing day, Zara felt her strength returning and her fear receding. Quinn was a patient teacher, showing her how to read the land, how to move quietly through the wilderness, and how to care for her horse. On the 6th night, they reached a small settlement in Nebraska territory, little more than a trading post, and a handful of buildings clustered around a dusty street. "We'll stop here," Quinn decided, eyeing the small town from their vantage point on a ridge. "I know the man who runs the general store. He's trustworthy and we need supplies." The settlement was quiet as they rode in, most of its inhabitants already abed for the night. Quinn led them to a modest clapboard building with a sign declaring it Wilson's General Mercantile. He knocked softly at the back door, which was opened after a moment by a grizzled older man with a shotgun in his hands. "Who's there?" the man demanded. Then his expression changed to one of surprise. "Quinn? That you, boy?" "Evening, Frank," Quinn replied with a nod. "Sorry to come calling so late. We're in need of some assistance." Frank Wilson's shrewd eyes took in Zara's disguise and Quinn's vigilant posture, and he stepped back, ushering them inside without further questions. "Trouble?" he asked once they were seated at his kitchen table, a pot of coffee brewing on the stove. "Of a sort," Quinn admitted, briefly explaining their situation without divulging too many details. Frank nodded thoughtfully. "Blackwell's a name I've heard, even this far east. Nothing good attached to it." He turned to Zara. "You're safe here, miss. No one will trouble you under my roof." "Thank you," Zara said, relieved to be indoors for the first time in nearly a week. Frank provided them with a hot meal, fresh supplies, and the news that a small group of riders had passed through 2 days prior, asking questions about a tall cowboy and a young woman. "Told them I hadn't seen hide nor hair of anyone matching that description," Frank said with a wink, "but they seemed mighty determined. Said they were heading south toward the Kansas border." Quinn frowned. "Blackwell's cast a wide net." "Wider than you might think," Frank agreed. "They're offering a substantial reward for information." Zara's stomach clenched with fear. "How much?" $500. Quinn whistled low. "That's a small fortune in these parts." Enough to turn the head of anyone with loose morals, Frank agreed grimly. You'd best be careful who you trust from here on out. They spent the night in Frank's spare room, the first proper bed they'd slept in since leaving Quinn's cabin. Despite the comfort, Zara slept fitfully, troubled by the knowledge that Blackwell's men were so close behind them. In the morning, Frank's wife Sarah provided them with new clothing, a simple dress and shawl for Zara that would allow her to travel more comfortably, and fresh shirts for Quinn. I can't thank you enough, Zara said as Sarah helped her dress, grateful to be back in women's clothing after days in Quinn's oversized garments. No need for thanks, Sarah replied kindly. Any enemy of Mason Blackwell is a friend of ours. She hesitated, then added, Quinn's a good man. Best I know, in fact. You're fortunate he found you. I know, Zara said softly, thinking of the quiet strength and unwavering determination that had characterized Quinn's every action since their first meeting. When Zara emerged from the bedroom, Quinn was deep in conversation with Frank over a map spread on the table. He glanced up as she entered, and for a brief moment his composed expression faltered. His eyes widened slightly, taking in her transformation from disguised youth to young woman. We'll avoid the main roads, he was saying to Frank, quickly returning his attention to the map. Cut across here, through the Platte River Valley. Should put us in Abilene in another week or so. Frank nodded, but his eyes twinkled with knowing amusement as they darted between Quinn and Zara. They set out mid-morning, their horses rested in their saddlebags full of provisions. As they left the settlement behind, Zara noticed Quinn casting frequent glances in her direction, his expression unreadable. Is something wrong? She finally asked, self-consciously tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. Quinn shook his head. No, it's just... You look different. Is that a bad thing? Zara asked, suddenly uncertain. No, Quinn replied quickly. Not bad at all. The rest of the day passed in comfortable silence, but Zara was acutely aware of the subtle shift in Quinn's demeanor. There was a new tension between them, an awareness that hadn't been present before. When their hands accidentally brushed as he helped her down from her horse that evening, Zara felt a jolt of something that had nothing to do with fear. Their journey continued, the landscape gradually changing as they moved southeast. The rugged mountains of Montana gave way to the rolling plains of Nebraska, and finally to the golden prairies of Kansas Territory. With each passing day, Zara felt herself growing stronger, more confident, and increasingly aware of the man who rode beside her. Quinn, too, seemed to be changing. The grim determination that had characterized him in the early days of their journey was still present, but alongside it, Zara occasionally glimpsed something else. A softness in his eyes when he looked at her, a gentle teasing in his voice as he taught her the ways of the trail. One evening, as they made camp by a small stream, Quinn surprised Zara by pulling a battered harmonica from his saddlebag. Didn't know you played, Zara commented as he polished it with a bandana. Not well, Quinn admitted with a self-deprecating smile. But it passes the time on lonely trails. He put the instrument to his lips and began to play a slow, melancholy tune that seemed to capture the vastness of the prairie around them. Zara closed her eyes, letting the music wash over her, transported back to evenings on her parents' porch when traveling musicians would stop by to play for a hot meal. When Quinn finished, Zara opened her eyes to find him watching her, an expression on his face she couldn't quite decipher. That was beautiful, she said softly. My father taught me, Quinn replied, turning the harmonica over in his hands. He played every evening after supper, said music was food for the soul. He sounds like a wise man. He was, Quinn agreed. Died when I was 16. Fever took him and my mother both within a week of each other. I'm sorry, Zara said, understanding all too well the pain of such loss. It's not easy being left alone in the world. Quinn's eyes met hers, and in that moment, a connection formed between them, a recognition of shared grief and resilience. No, he said softly. It's not. The next morning dawned clear and bright, promising another day of good travel. As they rode, Quinn began to tell Zara about Abilene, describing the bustling cattle town with its mix of cowboys, merchants, and settlers. "My sister Tilly runs a boarding house there," he explained. "Good woman, Tilly. Took over after her husband was killed in a stampede 3 years back. She'll give you a place to stay as long as you need it." "And what will you do?" Zara asked, realizing for the first time that their paths would eventually diverge. Quinn was silent for a moment. "I've got unfinished business with Mason Blackwell," he said finally. "Once you're settled and safe, I'll have to go back." The thought of Quinn returning to Montana territory to face Blackwell sent a chill through Zara. "That's too dangerous," she protested. "Blackwell has dozens of men. You'd be riding to your death." "I don't plan on facing him in open combat," Quinn assured her. "There are legal channels. With your testimony and evidence I've been gathering, the territorial marshals might finally have enough to move against him." "And if they don't?" Zara pressed, Quinn's jaw set in a determined line. "Then I'll find another way." They argued the point for the next several miles, with Zara insisting that Blackwell wasn't worth Quinn risking his life, and Quinn equally adamant that the man needed to be brought to justice. "It's not just about Thomas anymore," Quinn said finally. "It's about you, and who knows how many others Blackwell has hurt. Someone has to stop him." "Why does it have to be you?" Zara demanded, her voice rising with emotion. "Because I can't look myself in the mirror each morning if I don't try," Quinn replied simply. The honesty in his answer silenced Zara's objections. She understood duty and honor. They had been cornerstone values in her parents' home. But understanding didn't make the prospect of Quinn riding into danger any easier to bear, especially now that her feelings for him had grown beyond simple gratitude. That night, they camped in a sheltered hollow, the stars spread like diamonds across the vast Kansas sky. Quinn built a small fire, and they sat side by side watching the flames dance. "How did you end up in Montana?" Zara asked, breaking the comfortable silence. "You said your father died when you were 16. What happened after that?" Quinn poked at the fire with a stick, sending sparks spiraling upward. "I headed west, worked as a ranch hand, then a scout for the Army. Spent some time trapping in the mountains, eventually saved enough to buy my own spread small place north of where I found you." He shrugged. "It's not much, but it's mine. Or it was, until I left to track Blackwell's men. Probably overrun with weeds by now." "You gave up your home to pursue justice for your brother," Zara observed. "Home is just a place," Quinn replied. "Family is what matters, and Thomas deserved better than to be forgotten." Zara reached out impulsively, covering Quinn's hand with her own. "He was fortunate to have a brother like you." Quinn looked down at their joined hands, then up at Zara's face. Something shifted in his expression, a softening, a vulnerability he rarely allowed himself to show. "Zara," he began, his voice low and uncertain, but whatever he intended to say was interrupted by the distant sound of hoofbeats. Quinn was on his feet in an instant, extinguishing the fire with dirt and reaching for his rifle. "Riders coming," he said tersely. "Could be nothing, but we can't take chances." They quickly broke camp, mounted their horses, and disappeared into the darkness of the prairie, leaving no trace of their presence behind. As they rode, Zara couldn't help but wonder what Quinn had been about to say, and whether she would ever know. The riders proved to be a group of cowboys moving a small herd of cattle, but the interruption had broken the intimate moment between Zara and Quinn. For the next 2 days, they rode with renewed caution, keeping to less traveled routes and maintaining a vigilant watch. On the afternoon of the 13th day since leaving Montana, they crested a rise and saw before them the sprawling outskirts of Abilene, Kansas. The town was larger than Zara had expected, with buildings stretching along both sides of the railroad tracks that ran through its center. Even from a distance, she could see the bustling activity wagons moving along the streets, cattle pens filled with longhorns awaiting shipment east, and the distinctive silhouettes of cowboys on horseback. "There it is," Quinn said, a note of relief in his voice. "We made it." Zara felt a complex mix of emotions: relief at reaching their destination safely, apprehension about what awaited her in this unfamiliar place, and a deep sadness at the thought that her time with Quinn might soon be coming to an end. They rode into town as the sun was beginning to set, drawing curious glances from passers-by. Quinn led them to a well-maintained two-story house on a side street, its windows warm with lamplight, a sign above the door declaring it Thornhill Boarding House. As they dismounted, the front door opened and a woman stepped onto the porch. She was tall and sturdy, with Quinn's same storm-gray eyes and dark hair streaked with silver at the temples, pulled back in a practical knot. "Trace Quincy," she exclaimed, hands on her hips. 2 years without so much as a letter, and now you show up on my doorstep unannounced?" Quinn grinned, striding forward to envelop the woman in a bear hug. "Hello, Tilly. Missed you too." Tilly returned the embrace fiercely, then pushed him back to examine his face. "You look like you've been rode hard and put away wet. And who's this?" Her keen eyes turned to Zara, who stood uncertainly beside the horses. "This is Miss Zara Thornton," Quinn said, gesturing for Zara to join them. "She's in need of a safe place to stay. I was hoping you might have a room available." Tilly's shrewd gaze took in Zara's travel-worn appearance and the careful way Quinn positioned himself protectively at her side. Something like understanding dawned in her eyes. "Of course I have room," she said warmly, stepping forward to take Zara's hand. "Any friend of my brother's is welcome under my roof. Come inside, both of you. You look like you could use a hot meal and a proper bath." The boarding house was clean and comfortably furnished, with a large dining room where several residents were already gathered for the evening meal. Tilly showed them upstairs to adjacent rooms, promising to send up hot water for baths and clean clothes. "Supper's in half an hour," she informed them. "I expect you both to be there with clean faces and ready to explain just what kind of trouble you've gotten yourselves into." Left alone in the small but tidy room, Zara sank onto the bed in exhaustion and gratitude. For the first time in years, she felt truly safe. Yet, as she listened to Quinn moving about in the room next door, a hollow feeling settled in her chest. Now that they had reached Abilene, how much longer would he stay? Cleaned up and dressed in a borrowed gown of Tilly's that had been hastily altered to fit her smaller frame, Zara made her way downstairs to the dining room. Quinn was already there, deep in conversation with his sister, his hair still damp from washing, wearing clean clothes that fit him far better than the trail-worn garments he'd been traveling in. He looked up as Zara entered, and the conversation died on his lips. For a long moment, he simply stared at her, as though seeing her for the first time. Zara felt a blush rising to her cheeks under his scrutiny. "You look lovely, Miss Thornton," Tilly said into the silence, casting a knowing glance at her brother. "Doesn't she, Trace?" "Yes," Quinn agreed, finally finding his voice. "Yes, she does." Dinner was a lively affair with Tilly's other boarders' 2 elderly sisters, a young schoolteacher, and a railroad clerk providing cheerful conversation. Quinn and Zara answered questions about their journey with carefully edited responses, making no mention of Mason Blackwell or the true circumstances of their meeting. After the meal, when the other boarders had retired to their rooms or the parlor, Tilly led Quinn and Zara into her private sitting room and closed the door. "Now," she said, settling into an armchair and fixing them with a stern gaze, "I want the truth. All of it." Quinn glanced at Zara, who nodded her permission. Together, they told Tilly everything: Zara's 3 years of captivity, Quinn's search for justice for his brother, their dangerous journey across 3 territories with Blackwell's men in pursuit. When they finished, Tilly was silent for a long moment, her expression grave. "This Blackwell sounds like a dangerous man," she said finally, "and he clearly has resources at his disposal." "Which is why I brought Zara to you," Quinn explained. "She'll be safer here than anywhere else. Blackwell has no connection to Abilene, no reason to think she'd come here." "And what do you intend to do?" Tilly asked shrewdly. "I'm going back to Montana," Quinn said, his tone leaving no room for argument. "I'll bring evidence of Blackwell's crimes to the territorial marshal. With Zara's testimony and what I've gathered, it should be enough to see him brought to justice." Tilly's eyes narrowed. "That's a dangerous plan, brother." "I don't have a choice, Till. If I don't stop him, who will?" The siblings engaged in a silent battle of wills, communicating in the way only family can. Finally, Tilly sighed in resignation. When do you leave? She asked. Tomorrow, Quinn replied, avoiding looking at Zara. The sooner I get back, the better. Zara felt as though the floor had dropped away beneath her feet. She had known this moment would come, had prepared herself for it, but the reality was still a blow. Tomorrow. He was leaving tomorrow. I see, Tilly said, rising from her chair. Well, in that case, I'll leave you two to say your goodbyes in private. Zara, you're welcome to stay here as long as you like. We'll get to know each other better once this stubborn mule of a brother of mine is on his way. With that, she left the room, closing the door softly behind her. Silence fell between Quinn and Zara, heavy with unspoken words. You don't have to go, Zara said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. We could both stay here. Start new lives. Quinn moved to sit beside her on the small settee, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. Blackwell would never stop looking for you, he said gently. And I couldn't live with myself if I didn't try to bring him to justice for Thomas, for you, for everyone he's hurt. Zara nodded, understanding even as her heart rebelled against it. I know, she trailed off, unable to articulate the depth of her feelings. Quinn reached out, taking her hand in his. Zara, these past 2 weeks, I've never met anyone like you. Your strength, your courage, after everything you've been through. He paused, struggling for words. I want you to know that I'll come back. Once Blackwell is dealt with, I'll come back to Abilene. Zara looked up at him, searching his face. Promise me you'll be careful, she said, her voice thick with emotion. Promise me you won't do anything reckless. I promise, Quinn replied, his eyes never leaving hers. And then, with a gentleness that belied his rugged exterior, Quinn leaned forward and kissed her. It was a soft kiss, hesitant at first, then growing in confidence as Zara responded. His hand came up to cradle her face, his calloused thumb stroking her cheek with infinite tenderness. When they finally parted, both breathless, Quinn rested his forehead against hers. I should have done that days ago, he murmured. Yes, Zara agreed with a small smile. You should have. They remained like that for a long moment, savoring the closeness. Then Quinn reluctantly pulled away, rising to his feet. I need to prepare for tomorrow, he said, his voice regretful. It's a long ride back to Montana territory. Zara nodded, trying to be brave. I understand. As Quinn reached the door, he turned back to look at her. Wait for me, he asked softly, a vulnerability in his voice that Zara had never heard before. Yes, she promised without hesitation. I'll wait. Morning came too soon. Zara had slept little, her mind consumed with worry for Quinn and the dangerous task he was undertaking. She rose with the dawn and dressed in the simple clothes Tilly had provided, then made her way downstairs to find Quinn already in the kitchen, checking his gear one last time. He looked up as she entered, his face softening at the sight of her. Good morning, he said quietly. Morning, Zara replied, her heart heavy. Is there anything I can do to help? Quinn shook his head. Everything's ready. I'll be heading out shortly. Tilly bustled into the kitchen, her practical nature asserting itself in the face of the emotional moment. You'll at least stay for breakfast, she informed her brother, setting a plate of eggs and bacon before him. No arguing, Quinn smiled faintly. Yes, madam. The meal passed in relative silence, each of them lost in their own thoughts. All too soon, Quinn was rising from the table, gathering his hat and saddlebags. I'll walk you out, Zara said, rising as well. Outside, Quinn's horse was already saddled and waiting. The early morning sun cast long shadows across the street, the town just beginning to stir with activity. Quinn, Zara began, but he stopped her by placing a gentle finger against her lips. No goodbyes, he said softly. This isn't goodbye. I will come back to you, Zara Thornton. That's a promise. He kissed her then, a kiss filled with longing and promise and all the words they hadn't had time to say. When they parted, Zara reached up to touch his face, memorizing the feel of his stubbled jaw beneath her fingers. The sun will shine on you every day now, Quinn reminded her, echoing his words from that first night. Remember that while I'm gone. And then he was mounting his horse, tipping his hat to her one last time, and riding away down the dusty Abilene street. Zara watched until he disappeared from view, her heart riding with him toward whatever dangers lay ahead. The days following Quinn's departure blurred together for Zara. Tilly, true to her word, took Zara under her wing, helping her adjust to life in Abilene. The older woman asked few questions about Zara's past, but her quiet support and practical assistance were exactly what Zara needed. "My brother doesn't fall easily," Tilly remarked one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. "In fact, I've never seen him look at anyone the way he looks at you." Zara blushed, focusing on the mending in her lap. "I feel the same way about him." Tilly nodded, satisfied. "Good. He deserves some happiness after everything he's been through." She paused, then added, "He'll come back. Trace Quincy has never broken a promise in his life." As weeks turned into months, Zara found herself settling into a routine. She helped Tilly run the boarding house, took over the bookkeeping with her neat handwriting and head for figures, and slowly began to build a new life. She made friends among the town's residents, though she was careful never to reveal too much about her past. Still, she watched the horizon every day, hoping for a glimpse of a familiar rider on a Palomino horse. Each passing day brought both increasing worry and a strengthening of her resolve. Quinn had promised to return, and she believed him with every fiber of her being. 4 months after Quinn's departure, Zara was sweeping the front porch of the boarding house when she noticed a commotion at the far end of the street. A crowd had gathered, and there seemed to be some excitement. Curious, she set aside her broom and walked toward the disturbance. As she drew closer, she could hear snatches of conversation. Territorial Marshal himself arrested Blackwell and his whole gang, bringing them in for trial. Zara's heart leaped into her throat. Could it be? She pushed her way through the crowd until she reached the front, where a small procession was making its way down the main street. At its head rode a stern-faced man with a silver star pinned to his vest, the Territorial Marshal, she presumed. Behind him came several deputies, and between them, a line of shackled prisoners on horseback. Zara's blood ran cold as she recognized Mason Blackwell among them, his once immaculate appearance now disheveled, his face contorted with rage. She instinctively stepped back into the crowd, not wanting him to see her. But where was Quinn? She scanned the procession desperately, fear clutching at her heart. Had something happened to him? Was he? And then she saw him riding at the rear of the group alongside a deputy. He looked tired, thinner than when he'd left, with a fresh scar along his jawline, but very much alive. Relief flooded through Zara, so intense she felt her knees weaken. "Quinn!" she called out before she could stop herself. His head snapped up, eyes searching the crowd until they found her. The transformation in his face was immediate exhaustion, giving way to joy, tension melting into relief. He spoke briefly to the deputy beside him, then broke away from the procession, guiding his horse through the crowd toward her. Zara didn't wait. She ran to meet him, heedless of the curious stares of the townspeople. Quinn dismounted in one fluid motion, and then she was in his arms, held tight against his chest, as though he never intended to let go. "You're here," she whispered against his shirt, tears streaming down her face. "You're really here." "I told you I'd come back," Quinn murmured into her hair, his voice rough with emotion. "I saw Blackwell," Zara said, pulling back slightly to look at his face. "Does this mean—" Quinn nodded, his eyes never leaving hers. "It's over. The Territorial Marshal had been building a case against him for months. My evidence, along with testimonies from other victims who came forward, was enough to arrest him. He'll stand trial in St. Louis, and with the charges against him, he's looking at 20 years at least." "And you?" Zara asked, reaching up to gently touch the new scar on his jaw. "What happened?" Quinn's mouth quirked in a half-smile. "One of Blackwell's men objected to being arrested. It's nothing serious." Zara wasn't entirely convinced, but the important thing was that he was here, safe and whole. "And now?" she asked, suddenly uncertain. "What happens now?" Quinn took both her hands in his expression growing serious. Now, if you'll have me, I'd like to stay in Abilene. I've had enough of Montana to last a lifetime." "And your ranch?" Zara asked, remembering how proud he'd been of his small spread. "Sold it," Quinn replied simply. "Used the money to buy a parcel of land just outside town. It's good grazing land, with a creek running through it and a small cabin that needs some work. The marshals offered me a position as a deputy here in Abilene, but I thought I might try ranching again, starting small, building something new." He paused, his eyes searching hers. "Something we could build together, if you wanted." Zara's heart soared at his words. "Are you asking what I think you're asking, Trace Quincy?" Quinn smiled. A true smile that reached his eyes and transformed his face. "I'm not a man of fancy words, Zara Thornton, but these past 4 months, every mile I rode, every step I took, was leading me back to you. I love you. I think I've loved you since that first night when you looked at me with those brave green eyes, determined to survive despite everything you'd been through." He released her hands to reach into his pocket, withdrawing a small, simple ring, a silver band set with a single modest pearl. "This was my mother's," he explained. "I've carried it with me since the day I left home. I always thought I'd give it to the woman I wanted to spend my life with, if I ever found her." He took a deep breath. "Zara Thornton, will you marry me?" Zara's vision blurred with tears as she looked at the man before her, the man who had rescued her from darkness, who had taught her to trust again, who had risked everything to bring her tormentor to justice. The answer was as clear as the blue Kansas sky above them. "Yes," she said, her voice steady and sure. "Yes, I will marry you." Quinn slipped the ring onto her finger, and then he was kissing her, right there in the middle of Abilene's main street, with what seemed like half the town looking on. Zara didn't care. For the first time in years, her future stretched before her bright with promise instead of shadowed by fear. "Well, it's about time," came Tilly's voice, cutting through their moment of bliss. Quinn and Zara broke apart to find his sister standing nearby, arms crossed but a broad smile on her face. "I was beginning to think I'd have to lock you two in the root cellar to get you to admit your feelings." Quinn laughed, keeping one arm firmly around Zara's waist. "Sorry to disappoint you, Till. We managed just fine on our own." "So I see," Tilly replied dryly. "I suppose this means I'll be losing my best bookkeeper?" "Not right away," Zara assured her. "The cabin needs work before it's habitable, from what Quinn says." "And I wouldn't dream of depriving you of Zara's company," Quinn added. "We'll be close enough to visit often." Tilly sniffed, but her eyes were suspiciously bright. "See that you do. Now, I imagine you two have a lot to talk about, and I need to prepare for an influx of customers. Nothing brings people to a boarding house like a good trial." With that, she turned and marched back toward the boarding house, shoulders squared with characteristic determination. Quinn and Zara watched her go, then looked at each other and burst into laughter. "Your sister is a force of nature," Zara observed. "That she is," Quinn agreed. "But she likes you, which is more than I can say for most people." He took her hand, and together they began walking toward the edge of town, away from the crowd and the commotion surrounding Blackwell's arrival. The late afternoon sun bathed everything in golden light, casting long shadows behind them. "Tell me about this land you've bought," Zara said, leaning slightly against his shoulder as they walked. Quinn's face lit up with enthusiasm as he described the property, the rolling grassland perfect for cattle, the creek with its clear, sweet water, the stand of cottonwoods that provided shade for the small cabin. "It's not much," he admitted, "not yet, but it could be something fine with time and work." "It sounds perfect," Zara said sincerely. After the darkness of her cellar prison and the uncertainty of life on the run, the prospect of building something permanent, something that belonged to both of them, filled her with joy. They reached a small rise at the edge of town where they could look out over the prairie stretching away to the horizon. In the distance, Zara could just make out a cluster of trees that she guessed marked the location of Quinn's new property. "Our future," Quinn said, following her gaze. "What do you think?" Zara turned to look at him, this man who had changed her life in ways she was only beginning to understand. The setting sun highlighted the planes of his face, the new scar on his jaw, the crow's feet at the corners of his eyes that deepened when he smiled. He was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. "I think," she said slowly, "that the sun is shining on us both now, and it will every day for the rest of our lives." Quinn's arms came around her, pulling her close against his chest. As the sun sank below the horizon, casting the world in shades of gold and amber, they stood together on the threshold of their new life, bound by love forged in adversity and strengthened by shared dreams of the future. 1 month later, on a perfect autumn day, Trace Quincy and Zara Thornton were married in Abilene's small church. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt, attended by Tilly and a handful of friends they had made in town. Zara wore a gown of ivory silk that Tilly had helped her make, with the pearl ring Quinn had given her gleaming on her finger. As they exchanged vows, Zara looked into Quinn's eyes and saw reflected there all the promise of their future together, a promise that had begun on that fateful night when a determined cowboy had found a frightened woman locked in a cellar and vowed that the sun would shine on her every day thereafter. And so it did. In the years that followed, Quinn and Zara built their ranch into one of the most prosperous in the area. The small cabin was expanded into a comfortable home, filled with laughter and love. Quinn's position as deputy provided stability while the ranch grew, and Zara's head for business ensured their ventures thrived. 2 years after their wedding, Zara gave birth to their first child, a son they named Thomas, after Quinn's brother. He was followed 2 years later by a daughter, Sarah, named for Zara's mother. The children grew strong and happy, raised in the sunlight and open air that had once been denied to their mother. On the 5th anniversary of the day Quinn had found Zara, they sat together on the porch of their home, watching their children play in the yard as the sun set over their land. Quinn's arm was around Zara's shoulders, her head resting comfortably against him. "Happy?" he asked, pressing a kiss to her temple. Zara smiled, looking out at the life they had built together, the home, the children, the land that stretched before them, golden in the evening light. "More than I ever dreamed possible," she replied. "You kept your promise, Quinn. The sun has shined on me every day since you found me." Quinn tightened his arm around her, his voice soft with emotion as he murmured, "And it always will, my love. It always will." As twilight settled over the Kansas prairie, the Quincy family gathered together in their home, safe and loved and free, the shadows of the past banished by the light of a future built on courage, justice, and enduring love.